Hey y'all, how you doing? How do I start this video? Sometimes I will pick a topic that I want to talk to you guys about, and I don't really have a script, but I'll sort of practice what I want to say in my head while I'm in the shower or doing dishes. I'm gonna take my glasses off so that glare is not on it. Anyway, I'll practice what I want to say in the shower or while I'm doing dishes, just so that I have a general idea of everything I want to cover with you guys. So I was practicing in the shower this morning because I wanted to tell y'all a story. And I realized that in order to tell you that story, I had to tell you another story. And then in the course of telling that story in my head, I sort of went off in these little tributaries, and it became several stories. So anyway, I want y'all to bear with me. You might want to hit pause and grab yourself a drink. I am having a vodka and cranberry today because it's Friday. And anyway, so once you're back, settle in and listen, okay? So hit pause. Oh, okay, you're back. All right, so first I'm going to tell y'all the story of Jezebel, not her real name, and how I met Jezebel. So let's go back through the years. I think this would have been around 1993, 1994, maybe even 1995. I'm not quite sure, but our local news, the Lancaster News, it was the week leading up to Halloween. I believe that year Halloween was probably like on a Friday or a Saturday. And so the week leading up to Halloween, they had a nightly story or whatever you want, special story, whatever you want to call it, where they interviewed someone who was, word of Halloweeny, I don't know, other, unusual in some way. It seems like I recall, like one night they interviewed a guy who saw UFOs. This is a local person who saw UFOs and believed in UFOs and aliens and all that. And then the next night they interviewed the official medicine man of the Catawba Indian Nation. And then another night they interviewed Jezebel. Again, not her real name. And it turned out, and so of course I watch these things because I'm interested in these topics. So anyway, it turned out the interview was filmed in my local park in the town I lived in. And it turned out that Jezebel lived in my town. Now, she wasn't from my town. She moved to my town from some other state up north. And so I watched the interview with interest, and I thought, wow, that's cool, because at that time, I'd been practicing witchcraft probably about 3 or 4 years, but I didn't really know any other witches. There was one woman, her name was Rhonda. I worked with her in the mill and wound up hanging out with her daughter, who was a little bit younger than me. Rhonda was kind of cool. She was a graduate of the Gavin and Yvonne Church and School of Wicca back in the 70s. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But Rhonda did teach me some cool spells and things, and I liked her. She was a colorful lady. I liked her. I got along well with her. But her witchcraft and my witchcraft didn't really mesh, for lack of a better word. Where was I going with? Oh, okay, so I watched the interview with Jezebel, and I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. She lives in my town. It's a small town. We're bound to run into each other, right, at some point. So, fast forward, past Halloween, past Thanksgiving, past Christmas, past New Year's and Valentine's, into spring, late spring, probably early summer. I was working in the mill, the textile mill, Springs Industries in Fort Lawn, if y'all ever heard of those. And I worked second shift. And for those of you who don't know, second shift is you work 4 p.m. to midnight. And so I got to sleep in a lot. I got to go run around and do things during the day when most other people were at work, and I really liked it. But over in the afternoon, I started fixing some lunch and then something to take with me to work to eat. And I was standing at my stove, and this is in one of those old mill hill houses. So I'm standing at my stove. There's a window right here. There's a window right here. And behind my house, the kitchen was at the back of the house. Behind my house, there was a creek that ran right past my house, and beyond that was all woods. I really liked that house because I used to go sit out on my back porch and meditate on the steps, and I could just hear the sound of that running water going by, and the wind going through the trees, and it was very peaceful. But anyway, I was standing at my stove cooking something, and I happened to look over out of this window, and I saw this big, ugly bird. And I said, damn, that is an ugly bird. It looked like an ugly pigeon. I'd never seen any bird like that before. It was just so ugly, and I didn't think nothing about it. So probably a few days later, again, it was over in the afternoon. I'd already cooked lunch. It was probably around 2:30, and I would usually leave about 3:30 to head to work, to go to Fort Long, and be at work at 4. And the mail had run, so I was walking out of my front yard to my mailbox, and here come, walking down the street, who was it? Jezebel. We struck up a conversation. I didn't know it at that moment, but at that time I was wearing a pentagram, and she saw my pentagram, didn't really bring it up at the moment, at that exact time, and she asked me, had I seen her African gray? And I was like, oh, you mean that ugly pigeon? So apparently that ugly pigeon I saw was this big African gray that somehow it belonged to her, it got out of her house. And I told her, yeah, I'd seen it. It's up in the trees by my kitchen. I saw it there a couple days. And so she asked me if it was okay for her to hang out in my backyard and try and coax this bird down. And I said, sure, go ahead. And at that time, I had a very close-knit family. Now, across the street from me was my grandparents, the house I grew up in. 2 houses over was an aunt. 2 houses over was an uncle. And right beside me was another aunt, right? So I had to let my family know, hey, y'all, don't freak out. That lady from the TV, because, it's a small town, people had been talking about her. That lady, Jezebel, she's going to be hanging out in my backyard trying to get her bird. So anyway, that's how me and Jezebel met. She, like I said, she recognized my pentagram. We started talking about witchcraft. She gave me some cool stuff, we started hanging out, we traded readings, and, at that time, like I said, I didn't really know any other witches except for Rhonda, and our witchcraft didn't mesh, and so Jezebel, her witchcraft and my witchcraft meshed better, and she was kind of a teacher to me. She was something of a mentor. She's the one that actually encouraged me to be a writer, because back at this time, I was more of a visual artist. I had some talent for drawing. Those of you who follow me on Instagram probably seen some of my artwork, which is not as good as it used to be. Also back in the 90s, a completely different story. I hurt my hand. I got arrested, and the cop slapped the glasses off my face. He had the gun in my hand. So they tell you to put your hands up. I put my hands up. He grabbed my hand and bent my fingers back, and these fingers right here was about this far from my wrist. So I don't have that control that I had before. The good thing about that is living now is with iPads, I have this program on my iPad. It makes me easier to draw, and if I draw, I mess up, I just hit that back button, and it's so much easier. So, I draw a little bit now, and again, I'm getting off track, but you came here to listen to these stories. Anyway, so like she got me also involved in the pagan prison ministry, and at one time for Ward. Now, those of you who don't know, Ward was Witches Against Religious Discrimination, and they had chapters all over the United States, and they worked toward making the world safe for witches. And they also had a pagan prison ministry division. And so, working with Jezebel, I became the director of communications for the pagan prison ministry. And in that capacity, I would get letters from prisoners and inmates all over the country, and I would either try to hook them up with a pen pal, or I would be their pen pal, and I would find them information that they were looking for, or resources, or what have you. Let's see. Now, Jezebel had a huge room full of bookcases and all kinds of books. The whole room was lined with bookcases, and it was really cool in that I got to go over there, and I would get to check out books and read them, and sometimes I would Xerox stuff for the prisoners and mail it back to them, help them get the information they were looking for. Or if we couldn't find them a pen pal, I was their pen pal. So I would do that stuff, and we worked together. We wrote I have a copy in the living room. What is it called? It's the official South Carolina Department of Corrections Wiccan Study Handbook. We wrote that together. Now, me and her had kind of a falling out. We're no longer friends. And the later editions of that handbook, my name has been removed. I do have my copy, like I said, in the living room. It's a green book, and my name is on there. The other thing I should tell you about Jezebel is one of the first times I met her, when she came over my house, we traded readings at my kitchen table, and she admitted to me that she was a prostitute. She met men online, and they paid her for sex. And at the time, I was young. I'm a gay boy in a small town. She didn't judge me for being gay, and that gave me a little bit of freedom to sort of express my true self, because I kind of, even though I told my family I was gay, I didn't whore around, for lack of a better word, because again, grandmother's across the street, aunt right here, uncle right here, another aunt right here. I had a guy come over to my house one night, 3 o'clock in the morning. We did stuff, and he left at 5 o'clock in the morning. You would think nobody would ever know. These bitches knew. So I had to exercise sort of, discretion, because of my family surrounding me, and she allowed me to be a little bit more of my true self around her. I didn't have to hold back in any way. So I didn't really judge her for that. I did not have a computer at the times when we were writing this book and stuff. And so a lot of times I would go over to her home. I actually had a key to her home, and she had a fence around her yard, and I had a key to the lock on her fence, because a lot of times when she was out with her Johns, I would go over and let her dogs out and make sure they had food and stuff. And sometimes I would need to use her computer for ward work. And where was I going with this? As we were writing the book, sometimes her computer was in her bedroom, and sometimes she would be on her bed, and I'd be at the computer. She'd be dictating stuff to me, and she had AOL, and she would get an instant message from one of her Johns. And what's funny is a lot of times they thought they were talking to her, but they were talking to me, and I knew her prices. I knew her do's and don'ts, like certain things she wouldn't do, and I would sit and talk to them and set things up. I go, oh, hey, Jezebel, so you're going to meet this guy at 9 o'clock tonight at such and such hotel. So they thought they were talking to her. They were actually talking to me. So anyway, getting around to the original story I wanted to tell y'all about Squirt. I'll just go ahead and say his name. Squirt was her pet raccoon. Now, let me explain that. Jezebel was one of these animal rescue people, and like a lot of these animal rescue people, she had a menagerie in her home. Of course, she had the African Greys. She had dogs, big dogs and little dogs. She had cats and kittens. She had an iguana. She had a big, what do you call those things, boa constrictor, like a huge snake. It was in a huge aquarium in her living room with rocks on the top so we couldn't bust out. And she, through the animal rescue community, she got a raccoon that had been lost its mother, and then its first owner was a man, and apparently that man was abusive to Squirt, and he either got rid of it or someone took it off of his hands, went to this other animal rescuer who couldn't really take it in, and so then it went to Jezebel. Hold on, I need a drink. So Jezebel got this raccoon, and his name was Squirt, and because he had been abused by his previous owner, was a man, it didn't like other men. And I was nice to the raccoon, but it just did not like me. It would hiss at me and growl at me. And I got to where, honestly, I hated it. Not because it was a raccoon, but because it was just so mean to me. And I remember one time, now she would carry this raccoon with her everywhere. Like, she would come over to visit and she'd bring the raccoon with her. And I made her put it on a leash. And by that time, I had moved out of that house into an apartment across town where I had more privacy from my family. And there was an upstairs, it had an upstairs and a downstairs, and there was a handrail. And so she would put the raccoon on a leash and then tie that leash to the handrail, and the raccoon would just run up and down the steps, and I didn't have to go around it. Anyway, so, but like I said, she would carry that raccoon with her everywhere. So a lot of times when we went to these different prisons to teach the course on Wicca to these prisoners, she would take the raccoon with her. And a lot of times I'd be like, I don't want to be in the car with the raccoon. It growls at me, it tries to bite my toes. So when we were going to this particular prison down past Buford, which was like a 4-hour drive one way, she said she would put Squirt in a cage in the back seat. So near the end of the trip one way, we were approaching the prison. I think we're probably about an hour to a half an hour out from the prison. She stopped somewhere to use the restroom at a convenience store and maybe get us a drink or something. She let the raccoon out of the cage to let it stretch its legs. Because again, by this time, the raccoon had been in the cage for about 3 hours. And then she didn't put it back in. This pissed me off because we're driving down the road, the raccoon's in the back seat, running around, and suddenly, out of nowhere, it jumps on top of my head, bites my head, and we have all these little blood vessels in our head. So it scared me. It wasn't very painful, and it did break the skin. So I just have blood rushing all over my head. So I want you to imagine me and her showing up to this prison. This was our first time at this particular prison, getting met by the chaplain, and I just have blood all down my face. To backtrack a little minute about these prisons now, the head chaplain over all the chaplains in South Carolina, he was an ally to us. He liked us. We actually, by teaching this course, we prevented the state from being sued by a certain prisoner who felt that his religious rights were being denied, and he was going to sue the state, which would have cost lots of money. We agreed to write this course and go around and teach it to others, and set up a way for Wiccan, witch, and pagan identifying inmates to practice their religion. And a lot of times during these classes, the officers, the guards, they would sit in, because there were some who were out pagans, and there were some who were closet pagans. Some of the chaplains we went to visit absolutely did not want us there. I can make another video and tell you about some of the things that we had to go through in order to be teachers. And some of the chaplains we went to were very welcoming and open with us. There was the chaplain at this place, he happened to be open and welcome. He identified as a Christos. And for those of you who don't know, a Christos is a Christian who practices magic. So this chaplain understood about the raccoon biting my head. They sent me with a trustee, which is a trusted inmate. A trustee escorted me to a bathroom. I cleaned, my face and my hair up in the sink and dried off and fixed it as best as I could, and then went back and taught our course. Okay, so Anyway, we got back home. Let's fast forward a little bit. So this probably would have been, this is the original story I wanted to tell y'all. This is a story about witchcraft in the Deep South. So, sometime in the summer months, she would let her dogs out to go potty or whatever. She would let the raccoon out. And this one particular day, she let the dogs out. She let the raccoon out to potty in her yard. And again, she has her entire yard, front and back and sides, is surrounded by a fence. And there's a lock on the gate. So she didn't worry about the animals running away or anything. So anyway, she let the animals out to go potty, and then she let them, after a while, she let them come back in. They were scratching on the door, ready to come in. She opened the door, all the dogs ran in. The raccoon, Squirt, nowhere in sight. So she went outside and called him. He didn't respond. She walked down in the front yard, looked around, looked on the sides, looked in the back. The raccoon is absolutely gone. There were some children playing in the street, and the children told her that some man took the raccoon. And of course, they're children, so they don't know, they knew the color of the car. They didn't know if it, make, model. They didn't know who the man was. Just some man walked over to the fence, grabbed the raccoon, and I don't know how the man grabbed the raccoon, and it didn't put up a fight. I have no idea, but the raccoon was kidnapped. So, Jezebel, not typically the type to call the police, and knowing it's a small town where everybody knows everybody's business, she called me up, told me what happened. She said, come over here. We're going to do a ritual to bring Squirt back. I said, okay. So I went over there. I thought we were going to do something inside her house. No. So at her front yard in the corner, she had one of those outdoor sort of tables with the umbrella in the middle. And so we pulled that table out a little bit and moved the chair so that we're able to sort of walk around it and make an altar. She put a candle on that altar. There was a cigarette. There was some alcohol. And then there was a black felt doll. Actually, I had made that doll for her. She had asked me to make her one. And that's another story. Maybe I'll tell it to you if y'all are interested in about the upside down doll. So anyway, I had made her this doll, and that was on the altar. And so, before I tell you the ritual, let me explain a little bit about what Jezebel told me about her family. She said part of her family came from New Orleans, and so her witchcraft was sort of a mixture of old traditional witchcraft and hoodoo and Wicca. And publicly, I'm going to tell you this because I'm not saying her name. Publicly, she was Wiccan. She didn't curse and she observed the rule of three. But privately, I knew her to curse people. And me being young in witchcraft, I let that get into my practice a little bit. I know specifically 3 times she cursed people. There was an ex-boyfriend who threatened to expose her as a prostitute. The second time was a woman who had been an abused wife who came to live with her. She reached out to Ward for help, and Darla basically had to take her into her own home, and that woman kind of betrayed her. I kind of felt like in that sense it was justified when she cursed that woman. That woman had 3 children, little boys. One of them tried to build a bomb in her house. They threw rocks at me, so I did participate in cursing that woman, and I had no qualms about it. And then the third curse is the curse I'm explaining to you now about bringing back Squirt. Back to Jezebel's family history. She told me she had an aunt who was kind of like a sex magician who practiced sex magic, and she said this aunt had a Cadillac that she would drive up and down Bourbon Street or whatever street in New Orleans, and her trunk was, quote, full of condoms. And she told me how her aunt had this book, like her book of shadows, but in it, it had the names of all the men and presumably women that she used magic on and she had sex with, and she had plans for all these people, and she would write about, you know, what she planned on doing, how she planned on using these people to get money for herself, to get fame for herself, to, you know, get a nice house, whatever. And she would record the spells she used on them, and presumably in any pillow talk that she could probably use against them. She had a grandmother who was blind and who could differentiate herbs by smell. And she told me about how this grandmother taught her about herbs through smell, and like part of her initiation was she was blindfolded, taken out in the woods, and she had to sort of spin around and around and around, and then she had to collect a certain number of herbs and then find her way back without taking the blindfold off. She had, I can't remember if it was an uncle or a grandfather who was basically a horse whisperer. So this was a little bit of Jezebel's background, and I still know some of the things she taught me that are very, very effective. I've taught you guys some of it, but there's still some stuff that I've held back just because it's not the type of stuff that I want to give out to just any old body or put out there on YouTube, because I don't think that a lot of people have the maturity enough to wield the kind of power and knowledge that was passed on to me. Because honestly, it was some powerful stuff that I've had to use in my own life at certain times. And every time I did it, now that I'm older and wiser, I sought to know that it was justified. Let the punishment fit the crime through tarot and other, you know, magical means or the advice of other people. Anyway, so back to our ritual. Here we're in her front yard at her altar. So what she did was she lit the cigar and she went around to the four corners and blowed smoke. And then she gave me the bottle of alcohol. Hold on, I feel like I got a burp. Excuse me. So she gave me the bottle of alcohol, and so I went around and I would take a swig of that alcohol, take a deep breath, and blow it to the four corners, just like you've seen in movies where they'll take alcohol and blow it on people, or like sort of like a spit tag. And she called down some power. Again, this is in her front yard in the middle of the day. People are coming out watching us. I'm just sort of focusing on her and not really thinking about the other people. So then she called down something, and then we lit the candle, and we were focusing on returning Squirt. And the doll represented the person who took Squirt. And so by this time we were sitting in chairs at her little altar at this outside table with the candle in between us. She was holding the doll, and we were just sitting there staring at the flame, focusing on bringing Squirt back. And then I don't know what happened. Something came over me. I don't know if it was possession or what, but I reached out, took the doll from her, but I kept it sort of in her hand. So she had the doll in her hand. I took her hand, pulled it over to the flame, and then we were both sort of holding the doll, and I put the doll's head in the flame, and I started chanting, and I remember it to this day: fire, flame, thief, burn, until Squirt is returned. And so once she heard it, she joined in, and we just kept chanting, fire, flame, thief, burn, until Squirt is returned. And then that doll just started burning up, and then we dropped it on the table, and we just kept chanting and chanting as that doll burned up. And then as the doll completely burned up, our sort of chant sort of ebbed and came to a stop. So we finished the ritual, we blew out the candle, we kind of sat around for a few minutes or a little bit, and then I finally said, I got to go. So I left, and later that night, she gave me a call and told me that Squirt was back. So she got her raccoon back to her after we did that ritual. I don't know if it was the magic that made it happen, or if it was the magic of gossip that, it went around that we were out there doing witchcraft and calling on powers to curse that person until Squirt came back, and that person's, conscious or superstition. They didn't want any trouble. They just brought it back. But anyway, that is the stories that I wanted to tell you today. I hope you enjoyed this. If you liked it, there's a couple of more stories I can tell you. Just let me know in the comments that you'd like to hear about my adventures in the pagan prison ministry or the upside down doll. Anyway, I hope you all have a great weekend. Enjoy your drinks, and I'll see y'all next time. Bye-bye.